At Charlotte, we believe nothing is more powerful than what's next. Welcome to the university where potential turns into action, opportunity turns into success, innovation turns into transformation, and leaders drive progress in Charlotte and beyond. Here, barriers are made to be broken, and community is the foundation for greatness. At Charlotte, your chance to create the future begins. What happens after that is up to you. Charlotte, shape what's next.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Troyer, and I'm proud to be the Dean of the Belk College of Business at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I'm pleased to welcome you here today to the North Carolina Economic Forecast. So over the years, we have been very thankful for our friends in the business community for providing essential funding for this particular event and the research that underlies the presentation. Sponsors really help keep this quarterly event free, complimentary for students and alumni and members of our community. If you're interested in sponsorship information, please reach out to us at belkrsvp@uncc.edu. If you have questions, please submit them via the chat at any time. And we will have an extended, a question and answer period after John finishes his remarks and end at 1 o'clock today. So we'll be an hour. For those of you on Twitter, you can join today's conversation by using hashtag #NCForecast. We look forward to seeing your tweets. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and our speaker, Dr. John Connaughton. John is a professor of financial economics in the Belk College of Business. John joined the Belk College faculty in 1978 and became director of the North Carolina Economic Forecast in 1981. And he presented his first quarterly forecast presentation in late 1982. So for 4 decades, from President Reagan's Morning in America to the dot-com bubble and burst, to 9/11, and now the uncertainty of the global pandemic, John has been interpreting the data and sharing his expertise on where the North Carolina economy has been and where it's going next. So thank you, John.
This is the North Carolina fourth quarter North Carolina Economic Forecast for 2021. Make sure we go through this. So we're going to do the presentation at 12:40. I hope I'll be done. I've got a lot of slides, so it's going to be a while for me before I get through with them. But hopefully by 12:40, we'll open up for questions, which you can ask through chat. All right, so here we go. Kind of outline for today what we're going to talk about. Well, first of all, as everybody knows, the virus is back. We've had the Delta surge in the late summer, early fall, and now the new variant, new mutation, Omicron, is upon us. We don't know at this point in time how severe it will be, how contagious it is, and what to expect, quite frankly. But we're going to take a look at some of that today. We're going to look at the labor market. There's been a lot of talk about issues in the labor market, particularly on the supply side. We're going to do outlook for remainder of 2021. We're not quite done yet, and then spend some time on 2022 and some interesting things that are happening there. And then finally, we're going to finish with a discussion of inflation, which we first talked about in the May forecast. We spent about 7 or 8 slides on inflation. At that point in time, it was starting to appear to be a problem. And 6 months later, it is now officially a problem. Even the Fed chair has agreed that it's a problem. So it's kind of interesting. All right, so the virus is back. So for those of you that have been with us for a while, since we started doing this online or virtually, the first case was popped up in Wuhan in December 1st of 2019. By December 8th, we had our first hospital case. So far, 267 million cases worldwide, 5.3 million deaths worldwide, 45 million cases in the US. We have one of the highest case rates. And then 790,000 deaths in the US so far. And we have one of the highest death rates in the world, okay? So, you know, we've been struggling with this virus for basically 2 years. This is the latest information in North Carolina on a daily case basis, new cases, 7-day moving average to take out the lumpiness that exists in reporting. You can see the winter 2020, 2021 spike and the recent summer spike here. You can see that it's a little bit narrower than what we had here. So the number of cases under each of these areas, the area under the curve, it's a little smaller here, but we still haven't, we've dropped down to about 2,000 cases a day, but we haven't gotten down like we did last summer after that winter spike where we were less than 500 cases a day. So we're still, Delta is still a problem with us in this state. Deaths 7-day moving average, much better. If you look back here, you can see the spike was quite heavy, but if you look here, the deaths really quite a bit lower than they were in the winter spike in 2021, and that's simply because we've in this case more vaccinations and also better treatments that are available. Here's a kind of a side-by-side comparison of the two spikes, the winter spike in blue and the summer spike, and you can see that we're coming down. We're a little bit better at this point in time, but the question is, will we continue to go down, or will Omicron have a problem or create a problem that sends us back up? We don't know, just don't know at this time. And this is the 7-day moving average, and you can see that the moving average for deaths is much lower than it was in the winter of 2021. Here's an interesting slide. I thought I'd throw this out to show you that this disease really isn't a national disease. This is very local. So this is since we started to see back in July, when we started to see the Delta variant emerge, and we started to track it. And of course, the news, everybody saw Florida had this incredible increase in cases, over 1 case per 1,000 people per day, essentially, and quite a hefty spike. And then it virtually went away and went down to almost essentially nothing. At the same time, Minnesota has been steadily ramping up, and it's continuing to go. We don't know where this is going to go. But what's interesting here is a lot of us spend a lot of time with differential calculus, but every once in a while it's important to take a look at integral calculus, which is essentially the area under the curve. So if you look at the area under the curve here in Florida, you get a pretty big area here. But because this keeps going, this is actually a little bit bigger. And so in terms of the number of people who've had it, and of course the length of time, and you can see this. I mean, I picked these two out because they were kind of the opposite end of what happened. Florida had that big spike, and and then it basically went away. Minnesota's just been steadily trending up ever since this thing began back in the late summer. So it's kind of an interesting comparison of how different states get affected completely different. And so this virus becomes a very local event, much more so than a national event. We're not all seeing the same thing at the same time. All right, and real quickly, we go through these. These are the counties that are most impacted, and we can see here that we've got, in terms of cases, what we have here is case rate here. It's Robeson County and Duplin. Basically, a fifth of their population has gotten coronavirus. And in terms of deaths, we've got some pretty hefty death rates in some of the counties here, approaching 3% in some of the counties. And that's death rate per case of coronavirus. What percent of people who get coronavirus ultimately die in those counties? When we look at the least affected, that's quite a bit different story. Remember, we have 213 in one county per 1,000 population. In terms of least affected, we have several that are under 100,000 in terms of population. The same thing with the death rate. We've got some counties with death rates approaching 3%, and we've got some counties that have incredibly low death rates. All right, and there don't seem to be a lot of reasons or explanatory reasons why that would be the case, why there's such disparity. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. Not just is this not a national pandemic, it's kind of state by state, but it's also county by county in terms of how bad it is and what you run into in your own little county. All right, state GDP recovery. So we're going back to 2019 Q4, which was sort of the peak GDP before this all began. We take a look at the state's GDP and compare that to in the second quarter of 2021, and compare that to 2019 Q4, and you can see that several states, okay, virtually half the states, I think it's like 28 states, actually are above where they were in 2019 Q4. So we've gone through the decline, the recession, if you will, associated with the pandemic, but now we're back up on the other side. You see North Carolina's 10th out of that. We're actually 2.5% as of the second quarter, which ended in June of 2021. We are essentially above where we were by 2.5% before this all began. So our economy is 2.5% bigger than it was when this all began. There are, however, some states, excuse me, I think we went through, there are some states here that are not doing it quite as well as you can see. Several are still down: Hawaii, Alaska, Wyoming, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Connecticut. Several are still considerably below where they were when this all began, and are very, very slow to recover, again, for a variety of reasons. If we take the top two, obviously that's tourism related. In Oklahoma, Wyoming, Louisiana, it's energy related. And then there's a kind of a mixture after that. We've got some energy states like West Virginia. We've got some tourist states like Nevada, but then we have states pushed in here that are just, again, no reason why they should be not doing as well, but they're performing worse than in the overall US, and certainly worse than the top 15 states. From an unemployment standpoint, you can see here, a number of states have some incredibly low unemployment rates as of October of 21. Nebraska is below 2%. You've got several states that are below 3%. North Carolina, we did really well in terms of GDP recovery, but we're still running at about a 4.1% unemployment rate, 21st in the nation. But I want to remind everybody, 4.1% unemployment rate is considered full employment. And so while, as you'll see in a minute, we're not back to gaining back all the jobs we lost. There's a reason for that that's unrelated to how healthy the economy is. We're still in pretty good shape given what we've gone through over the last year and a half. So this state has performed better, much better than average in terms of our economy during this event. And I think going forward, we'll probably continue to do well through 2022 as well. Okay, here are states that still have very high unemployment rates. And you can see the disparity here. Overall, the nation is a 4.2% unemployment rate, but we've got some states that are almost double that in terms of their unemployment rates. Simply haven't been able to get their economies up and running again. One of the things I always remind folks of, consumer confidence, and the pandemic, and particularly the Delta variant and Omicron have caused a decline, if you will, in since February of 2020. Since this summer of 125.1 on the consumer confidence, down to 109, and that's always problematic. As you know, I always remind everybody that GDP is 70% consumption. So when consumers aren't happy, the GDP isn't happy. So this is something to concern ourselves with going forward. All right, mentioned that we'll talk a little bit about the labor market. So real quickly, you've seen this chart before, but I always want for folks that are new and it's the first time they've seen this, I just want to make sure they get a sense of what's going on here. This is the job losses that we experienced in March and April of 2020, when we basically shut down the US economy. During that period of time, US lost 22 million jobs, North Carolina lost 16 million jobs, and these are by sector. So the blue is the US, and the green is North Carolina. You can see right here that almost 50% of the jobs in the leisure and hospitality industry in North Carolina were lost. Other services, about a quarter of the jobs were lost. And so those are the two big sectors that were hit. Flipping and looking at it on a percentage basis, the percentage of total jobs were lost, almost 43% in hospitality and leisure, 11% in education and health services, and in other services about 6.1%. So you add all of this together and you're looking at pretty close to 60% of the jobs were lost in those three sectors during the pandemic, during the lockdown as a result of the pandemic in April and May. This is just a trend line to show you the North Carolina establishment employment, the big dip, pretty quick recovery, and then this kind of slow recovery with a couple of dips essentially associated with some of the spikes. All right, job recovery in the state has been kind of interesting on a sector by sector basis. So if you remember that first slide I showed you, where we showed you the decline in jobs in North Carolina, this is where those sectors sit right now compared to the job levels in February of 2020, before this all began, and before we started shutting down sectors, shutting down the economy. If you look here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of our sectors, 7 of our 14 sectors that have actually experienced job increases. There are more jobs there today. Well, let's see, I'll get that right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that have more jobs today than they did in February of 2019. Excuse me. Most sectors are getting very close. Only 2 sectors, really only 1 sector, leisure and hospitality is considerably down. But we also have some trouble in education, health services, other services in government. They're all pretty close to 5% below or 10% below where they were in terms of total employment in those sectors as of February of 2020. But most of the economy, as you can see, has recovered. Most of the sectors have recovered or are very close to recovery in terms of having the jobs back. This is kind of a track of the U.S. monthly jobs, and there's been a lot of concern recently of what's been happening. We had the October number come out, the November number come out. It was only 210,000, and people got real nervous about that. That was a poor performance, etc. I'll show you something in just a second to suggest that maybe not as bad as you think it is. But here are, the recovery out of starting in 2020, out of the pandemic. You can see we had a lot of jobs the first couple of months out of there in the summer of 2020, and then it kind of tapered off. And it's been building back up again. It's been bouncing along, but I don't look at that 210,000 job number as anything to be concerned about. It's a little lower than you'd like. Sure, we'd like 500,000 jobs. Maybe next month we'll get them. But here's the interesting thing about that. Well, here's North Carolina's jobs. We only have through November. We haven't got. We got through the November jobs. We had 31,000 jobs in November. So we kind of bucked the U.S. trend here. In terms of job creation at the end of the cycle. But you can see we've had a kind of up and down and up and down. But here's an interesting thing. A lot of information on this chart, so let's take it slow, but I think it's an important chart. The red numbers, the red bars, are kind of what we saw before, but just for 2021. So these are US numbers right here, okay? So we're starting roughly right about here, and we're going through just for the 2021. And you can see the red numbers are what we call the payroll employment or establishment employment. That's a survey that's done, and it surveys about 30% of the physical establishments in the United States every month. All right, and you can see the 210,000 number right here. We also do a household employment survey. That's the survey that gives us our unemployment rate, and that is done with 70,000 households. And that paints a completely different picture sometimes. Most of the time, these two surveys go along together. But all of a sudden, we see a big disparity in the November numbers. 210,000 payroll jobs at establishments, over 1.1 million new household jobs via the household sector. What's going on here? What's taking place? And what we're seeing here is a disparity between what's happening at physical locations where people go to work and what's happening, I think, particularly in the gig employment sector, et cetera, where in the entrepreneurial sector, where people are working from home, not necessarily connected with the business, but are self-employed or working in an arrangement where they actually don't go to some physical place to work. So if you're working for DoorDash or Uber or something like that, or you're day trading, what have you, you'd pop up on this survey, you wouldn't pop up on that one. So it's just something to kind of think about. When these things get out of line, you have to question whether this was as bad a number as you might think it was. We've heard a lot of folks talk about labor force participation rates. Here's the U.S. labor force participation rate. Through the pandemic, starting in January of 2019, the peak was reached just before 2020 at 63.4%. And of course, now we're down, just below 62% in terms of labor force participation rate. And the disparity between November's labor force participation rate, and the labor force participation rate in December or January of 20, before this all began, is about 2.5 million jobs or people, essentially. 2.5 million people. Same situation in North Carolina. See the big dip, obviously, during the shutdown. Right now, the difference between our labor force participation rate now and the peak back in the end of 2019 is about 73,000 people. So just keep that in mind. All right, and one of the last slides in this sector is, of course, job openings, our number of unemployed persons per job opening, and we're down now below 1. So we have less than one unemployed person for every job opening. So, we've got plenty of jobs for people who are unemployed. The biggest problem we have right now is the mismatch between what employers are looking for and the skill sets that potential unemployed people have to fill those jobs. And that's a big problem. That's why the unemployment rate is, I say, down at 4%, and why it can't typically go lower than that, simply because of that mismatch between job openings and job skills. And just one last slide on this. If we're looking at the October unemployment rate in North Carolina at 4.1%, if we adjusted it for the decline in labor force participation, it'd be about 5.5%. And the same situation in the US. But I'm loath to do that and to say that, well, really, this is the unemployment rate. I'm just giving you some comparisons here. And the reason for that is I'm not sure the labor force participation rate is going to change, and for a variety of reasons. We've had some serious issues take place in our economy, and this is really going to have a big impact going forward on our economy, particularly in 2022, but even through the next decade, frankly. We had work lifestyle balance adjustments take place as a result of COVID. It's just a fact. And so people's willingness to work, their conditions under which they work, they have changed as a result of COVID. We are undergoing, independent of COVID, demographic changes that are affecting our labor, the supply side of our labor market. COVID pushed early retirement. We also have gig employment, which is hard to pick up, and there was more of that. People have virus concerns, and we had a period of time where we had some work disincentives during 2020 and the first half of 2021. So we've got a lot of things going on that have affected the labor market. So for example, when we look at demographics, a lot of information here. I'll walk us through it here real quickly. What I want you to pay attention to is this red striped group right here. This is the number of people in 2020 that were between 60 and 64. They're now 61 to 65. There are just under 21 million. These people's retirement got pushed forward. The group that's getting ready to come in, and of course, they're not in yet, they're 16 to 20 now, and they're just starting into the labor force, is roughly the same size. But if you spin this ahead a few years, and you look at the 50 to 59 and 20, which are now the 56 to 60s, there are 21.6 million, and you can see the group that's going to follow them into the labor force is about 1 million smaller than that. Okay, and as a result, and then you look ahead another 5 years and you get about the same size, and you look ahead another 5 years and you get a much smaller one. And there's nothing we can do about these numbers here. They're here. We can't clone people and make more. That's it. That's what we got. And so we're going to actually see our labor force over the next decade shrinking. Okay. On top of that, there's strong evidence to suggest that the labor force participation rates of the younger generations is a little less than it was of the baby boomers. So you put those two things together, and labor shortages and labor supply problems are going to be with us for quite some time. One last thing on this, and we'll put this to bed and start looking at what's going on in the economy in 21 and 22. Okay, so number one, we hear a lot of talk about, a lot of places went out of business as a result of COVID. Well, this is in North Carolina. This is total establishment growth by quarter, starting in 2019, 1 for first quarter. Second quarter didn't drop. Third quarter fairly level, and then boom, boom, boom. And by the second quarter of 2021, we had, if you do the math on this, all right, we had about 20,000 more places of business than we did before this all began. It's interesting. When we look at just leisure and hospitality, which was the hardest hit, we noticed that we saw some reductions in the third and fourth quarter of 2020 of 2020, but we started to see it pick back up again, so that by the second quarter, we're back up above that, and we're probably have, again, this axis here is very, very compact. We probably have about 600-700 more establishments today than we did at the peak before this began, and in hospitality. And the last thing is kind of looking at the unemployment rate for the country during this pandemic and recession, which was only a 2-month recession, and what took place in the Great Recession. So we're already back down, this is 2 years in, we're already back down to 2.4%. We were just reaching our peak of 10% 2 years in for the 2008-2009 recession. All right, so let's go through what's happened in the North Carolina economy in 2021. Start off great, big first quarter, 9.9% growth, 6.2 in the second. We're expecting a reduction like we saw in the US to 2.6 in the third, and then picking up again in the fourth quarter as we get over the Delta insurgence, if you will, resurgence. And overall, about 6.5% growth for the year. Looking at the sectors, one by one, you can see that hospitality and leisure services are going to have the biggest growth in 2021. Durable goods manufacturing, that's really the surprise. We've seen a really resurgence in durable goods and non-durable goods manufacturing in the state this year. It's been some of the strongest growth in 2021 in our manufacturing sector in essentially decades. All right. And then information, obviously a growth sector independent of recovery. And then we also see business and professional services, which is predominantly contract hiring labor, and education and health services recovering. But we do have 4 sectors that are going to show a decline, modest declines during 2021: agriculture, mining, transportation, and warehousing. And that's a supply chain issue, and also government is going to be down. On the job side of things, we're going to add 152,000 jobs this year. It's a growth rate of about 3.4%, pretty good. Hospitality and leisure services, again, going to lead the way in job growth. Information's in there. And again, our durables and non-durable goods are strong growth sectors in terms of jobs as well. By the end of the year, fourth quarter of 2021, North Carolina real GDP is going to be 4.3% higher than the fourth quarter of 2019. Simple thinking, that's roughly a 2% growth per year. Even though we had that big, deep decline in 2020, since that second quarter decline, things have gone well enough that not only did we get all the GDP back, all right, number one, but in addition to that, we've sort of essentially gotten some of the lost GDP back as a result of some really strong growth in early 21 and late 2020. Jobs, another picture. We're still down. We're going to have 22,000 fewer jobs at the end of the year, and the unemployment rate is going to be about 0.6% higher than it was in December of 2019. However, even this number is still pretty good on a historic basis. Okay, for 2022, looking forward here, this is going to be the craziest year I think that most of us will experience for a variety of reasons. We'll get into some of them in just a second. But we've got these known knowns. We know we've got supply chain issues. We know we've got inflation. Even the Fed chair said last week or 2 weeks ago, he said we're going to have to drop the transitory moniker from describing inflation. And we've got some significant deficit spending. But we also have known unknowns as well. And we have no idea what the new variant of the virus is going to do and how it's going to affect the economy. I don't think nationally it's going to have a common effect, but I think locally and within states it's going to have an impact, but we don't know what that's going to be. We also don't know what Fed tapering is going to look like. There's been no specificity associated with it. They've just kind of thrown out the idea that we may start tapering earlier than we had anticipated. And we have no idea what Fed interest rate policy is going to be in 2022. And so those are things that are incredibly important in terms of what's going to happen, but we have no idea what to expect on those three fronts. As a result of what has happened, particularly in 2021 and going into 2022, we think we're going to have about a 3.1% growth. As you can see, each quarter is below 3%, but that's because of the way in which we calculate annualized quarterly rates. It's a mathematical issue. I wouldn't, it's not something to worry about. My point here is this: 2022 right now looks like a return to the growth rates of between 2.5% and 3% that we had in 2019. In other words, we've gone through this recession, we've gone through this pandemic, and now things are back close to it in terms of what the potential growth rate we have, close to where we were in 2019. On a sector by sector basis, all but agriculture will grow. Again, we're looking at strong growth in hospitality and leisure services and information. They're going to be leading the way. We're still seeing pretty strong growth in manufacturing, both durables and non-durables. Construction's up, and transportation and warehousing is going to recover from what has gone on in 2021. And so we think that sector will come back and be positive growth in 2022. On the job front, 124,000 jobs next year, about 2.7% growth. Leading the way, hospitality and leisure services and other services, also information. And again, we've got some job growth in non-durables and durables again. And obviously construction in addition to that. That's where we'll see some significant job growth in 2022. The unemployment rate, we don't really think it's going to change much from where it is now. Probably 4.1% at the end of this year. Probably pushing 4% next year, 2022. Not much is going to change on that front. We don't really see 2022 as being a particularly troublesome year in terms of something coming along and happening. I'm fairly confident, and again, this I have to have a qualifier here. I'm fairly confident that the new variant of the virus, while it will be problematic in some parts of the country over some period of time during this year, and there may be more variants coming later in the year, I don't think we're going to have the response. I'm pretty sure, more than pretty sure, that we're not going to have the kinds of responses that we've had in the past, where we looked at virus containment as the only thing that we should be focusing on. I think that we're going to look at other things, both in terms of psychology, educational levels, and education in general, also the economy. I think we're going to take a much bigger look at how we deal with the virus going forward. And so I don't think that we're going to see any kinds of swings. And I think it's going to be, from an economic standpoint, it's going to be a much more normal type of year than what we've had in the past, with big swings in terms of quarterly GDP numbers. All right, last topic we're going to cover today. I might get done by 12:40. We're going to talk about inflation, because that is going to be the topic for 2022 and beyond, without question. That is one of the known knowns that we are aware of, and it is a troublesome problem for the economy. It won't have a big effect in 2022, but if we don't get a handle on it, it could start to become a problem. So let's take a look at it. So this is the CPI, and what we've got here are two sets of numbers. The blue numbers are the ones that we usually typically get information from. So the last number we have is for October. It's the annual increase, and what that is the October 21 Consumer Price Index versus the October 20 Consumer Price Index. How much higher it is? 6.2%. So we're all familiar with that. By the way, unfortunately, I don't have the November number. It comes out tomorrow morning. So for those of you that are interested, go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics after 8:30, and it should be there, and you can see what it is for December. The red number is a little different. The red number is a monthly annualized increase. And what that does is it compares the October 21 number to the September 21 number, all right, and then annualizes it as if, okay, if that jump that occurred from September to October would continue for a whole year, what would we see? And so in one respect, those red lines are kind of telling us, this is the trend we're on. This is what we can expect this is how bad it is. And you can see here that we've had, since about April, we've started to see troublesome annual increases that have been fairly consistent at the 5 to 6% level each and every month. Excuse me. And what we've seen here is, these big increases here on the month-to-month basis, which are kind of telling us what to expect, the next few months with the annual increases. And this one here is a little troublesome for sure. All right. This is the producer price index. And so, if we're looking at the October, again, the blue is the annual. We're looking at the October index. Producers prices are telling us, yeah, these are going to get fed down for the next couple of months to the consumer prices. Obviously, if producers prices or wholesale prices are rising, retail prices are going to start rising pretty soon as well. Whoops, wrong way. Let's go this way. All right, I kind of just for the heck of it did a deep dive on the 400 items that are in the CPI in October. You may find this interesting. This tells you, the CPI went up by 6.2% and all items are 100% of the total. But here are some items here and the percentage that they make up, the weight, if you will, of the CPI and the percentages. These are the ones that went up the most. A little less than 2%, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. Essentially proteins, up 12%. Fruits and vegetables only up 3.5%. So that wasn't a problem. Energy overall up 30%. Gasoline almost 50%. 12-month year to year. Furniture 12%. New vehicles 10%. Used vehicles over 25%. Televisions 10%. Lodging away from home 22%. And car and truck rentals 39%. Again, this makes up about 15% or so, 16%. Let's see, yeah, 17% of total. But these are the ones that have been basically driving. These are the big sectors that have been driving this 6.2%. So not everything. If you don't rent cars and you don't have lodging away from home, you haven't bought a TV and you haven't bought a car in the last year, a lot of this inflation isn't hitting you, okay? Obviously, energy is the one and protein are the ones that do hit us because those are things that we buy on a regular basis. And they've been going up, as you can see, considerably. All right, types of inflation. This is important to know going forward. Demand pull is when demand for output exceeds what the economy can produce. It's when demand exceeds supply. And as a result of that, if you all took your notes in your Econ 101 class, you know that when when demand shifts or increases relative to supply, prices go up because buyers bid the prices up. And part of the problem we've had is stimulus checks. We'll show you a little slide on that in just a second. On the other side of on the supply side, we have cost push, and that's when prices are pushed up by increases in costs or availability of the factors of production. And we've had both of those. We've had significant wage increases this year as labor has become in short supply. And we've also had shortages of factors of production, which cause increases in production costs. And we've also had worker disincentives, again, leading to increased costs on the production side of things. And here's a list of, we talk about this demand pull side of things and increased aggregate demand or increased demand exceeding the supply. This is a list in the last year and a half of the bills that Congress has passed that are new spending. And with the passage just recently of the infrastructure bill, we're up to $7 trillion. This is not part of the normal budget. It's, over there at $4 trillion. This is all new additional spending. Excuse me. Some of it's already been spent, some of it hasn't. Probably around $5 trillion has been spent up to this point. We still have about $1 trillion in the infrastructure bill, of course, which hasn't gone out yet. It'll go out over the next several years. And then we probably have about $1 trillion left over from all of these that haven't been spent. Some of that might be used for the Build Back Better program. That all remains to be seen. But I just want to give you a sense as to when I talk about demand for goods and services outstripping what's being produced, you can start to see some of the numbers here. This is kind of an interesting slide. I just figured this out. Average, household, two adults, one child. These are the checks they received in the spring of 2020, the fall of 2020, and the spring of 21. And these are the adult check sizes. These are the kid check sizes. And you can see that for a family of 2 adults and 1 child, they've received almost $9,000 in the last year in checks. And 80% or 104,000 households have incomes of levels that would allow them to receive these checks. So just throwing that out as information. And no productive service had taken place to put this extra $9,000 into the hands of 104,000 households to start buying products that haven't been produced. Here's an interesting slide. I just want to focus on the last three here real quickly. The last one is a nominal quarterly annualized increase in US GDP. Those are the blue. That's for the first quarter and the second quarter. And the US personal consumption, same percentage increase. That's quarterly annualized increase in personal consumption, 70% of the economy. That's what households are buying. Typically, these things track together, as you can see, but all of a sudden, almost 50% higher in personal consumption expenditures than GDP growth. Again, here, not quite 50%, but close. You see, by the third quarter, they're back sort of in line with one another. But you had these two quarters here, first and second quarter, where consumers have a lot more money in their pockets to spend than we were producing. And that's what gave us is the first round of, if you will, of inflation that we experienced starting in April of 2021. And so the first push for, if you will, for inflation was this demand pull inflation brought about by too many dollars chasing too few goods. All right, here's an example of runaway inflation in the 70s. I showed you this chart last quarter, just to give you a sense as to how high inflation was. So, we're sitting here with a monthly total of 6.2%. That was just kind of middle of the road for the 70s. All right, so 70 inflation pressures were brought about by new domestic programs, the war on poverty in the 60s, Medicare, Medicaid, aid to families with dependent children, food stamps, and 12 more social safety net programs were passed in the mid-60s. A year later, the Vietnam War picked up, and we started, we had half a million troops in country. And in 71, we left the gold standard. All of those things all became inflationary, which essentially led to what you saw in the previous slide. On the cost push side, we had gas, energy prices, and availability problems in 73 and 74, and again in 79. All those things conspired to basically create a decade of runaway inflation that was very harmful to the economy during that period of time. And I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that we're going to experience that going forward, but it is something that we should be concerned about. Today's inflationary pressure on the demand side, we've got domestic spending, which we showed you earlier, stimulus checks, including enhanced unemployment benefits that provide disincentives for work, payroll protection plan, the child care credit, which just got extended in the recent bill, and SNAP benefit upgrade. They've changed the way they calculate the SNAP benefit and the calories necessary, and it increased the SNAP benefit by about 20% for most families. That's a supplemental nutritional, what you might know as food stamps. So those are all on the demand side. And the demand side, the demand pull inflation was driving inflation up until the fall of 2021. So in the early part of the year, we were seeing predominantly demand pull. We're now seeing cost push inflation kind of reinforcing that demand pull because of declining labor force participation rates and shifting demographics, which we have gone over earlier, extended supply chains, and they're breaking down, expanded regulations, the COVID issues here, there, and everywhere, and vaccine requirements potentially pushing people out of work. This is a look at the Fed balance sheet. I'll have more to say about that, but it went from about $3.8 trillion before this all began to it's now $8.6 trillion. We're going to talk a lot in the next quarter, first quarter of 2022. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how the Fed is technically going to wind down their balance sheet and the kinds of problems, because it's my belief that the Fed has a principal agent problem when it comes to fighting inflation. And we're going to talk about that in great detail in March of 2022. All right, so keys to watch going forward. All right, COVID spike. What is Omicron? That shouldn't have an N in it. Let me get that out of there. No, I can't get that out of there. And potential lockdowns, which I don't think are going to be that severe. Vaccine dissemination, what's going to happen with that? Are we going to see increases in vaccine rates or the number of people vaccinated, going forward in 2022, which is going to help mitigate any type of spikes that COVID might have? Fed tapering and interest rate policy. What's going to happen with this new not reconciliation bill, I'm sorry, the Build Back Better bill, which is anywhere, depending on who you talk to, between 1.8 and $4.5 trillion. The November inflation number comes out tomorrow. The Fed meets next week, and we'll get more information on tapering. Consumer confidence number comes out just before Christmas, and the monthly job growth number comes out the first Friday of every month, and we'll get a look at the 2021 GDP for the year and the fourth quarter GDP on January 27th. So those are all going to happen between now and the next time we get together. So those are the things that I'm watching, and I've gone over a few minutes. I'm sorry, Dr. Troyer, but I'm now ready to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, John. So now we're moving on to the question and answer portion of our time together. So we have several questions that we've received so far, but just as a reminder, you can still submit your question via the chat feature. All right. So let me just start with supply chain. So we've got a question about the decision of the US not to go to the Olympics in Beijing. Do you see that as having any sort of impact on the supply chain economic situation?
No, I don't think that it will, Jennifer. I've also seen that the UK has sort of tacitly gone along with that, and Canada has sort of kind of gone along with that as well. I don't think, the president was never going anyway. And so I'm not sure that this is a big impact. We're still sending our athletes. And I think that, you know, the Olympics will go on, and I think it'll be a showcase for the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China. And I don't think that the lack of a few American diplomats and maybe the president's wife is going to have a big impact on supply chain going forward. There are a lot of other things out there that are affecting the supply chain that are probably much bigger factors than this photo op, if you will, or lack of a photo op.
Understood. Okay, so a couple questions about the labor market. Surprise.
Yeah.
So okay, so this question is clearly has, you know, this person has sort of an opinion about this. So I'm just going to read it kind of as is. So how can economists perpetuate the notion of full employment when there are several million job openings and many are narrating a job shortage, the great resignation, et cetera? Is this a concept that should be revisited?
Okay. First of all, it's a good question. We get this a lot, and it's always troubling to a lot of people when we say that the benchmark rate, the natural rate of unemployment is somewhere around 4%. And they say, well, how can that be? It should be 0. And technically, it can't be 0. Okay. And it can't be 0. And I'll use my fingers here. You've got this array or ladder, if you will, of job openings. Now, if the unemployed people with their skill set perfectly mesh with that, you're right. We could possibly have a lower than 4% rate of unemployment. All right. The problem is it doesn't. It's like this. And so the job openings that we're looking for and that employers have available does not fit the skill set of the current unemployed. Our belief is that, and we call this frictional unemployment, by the way, and our belief is that that natural rate of unemployment, or that benchmark rate, is somewhere around 4% right now. And that because of this mismatch, we can't do a lot better. If it makes anybody feel better, we do have actually 6 different unemployment rates that we calculate every month. And being the inventive group that economists are, we name them U1, U2, U3, U4, U5, and U6. And in the headline rate that we all see is the U3 rate. But the U1 and U2 rates are much, much lower than that. They're in the 1 to 2% range right now. And that's the difference is throwing people out that haven't had of the U3 rate that have been only unemployed for a few weeks. That's the real difference. And so if you will look at people that are just recently unemployed, that haven't been looking for a while, that have only been looking for a month or a month and a half, then you start getting into this 2% rate. All right. We just can't get this matched up perfectly. It's not like there's some cloud app in the sky that amazingly plugs everything in where it needs to be. There's job search issues as well. So it's a good question. It's a question that always comes up. But there are just some things that, you know, aren't perfect in markets, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit problematic how we name it too.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
I mean, I don't know what else to call it, but you know, I've been an economist too long, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, another supply chain sort of question. So this person asked, should we be considering changes to immigration policy to increase the supply of labor?
Well, this gets a little political, and it gets me out on some of the limbs that I typically don't like to go.
Feel free to pass if you'd like, but it was just kind of an interesting.
You know, I have been an advocate for quite some time of having an intelligent immigration policy. A lot of countries in the world, and Canada would be a good example. Take a look at where their economy is going, where they have occupation shortages, where they have needs, and they tend to tailor their immigration policy in the short run around those types of needs. Now, I'm not sure we should go quite to that level, but I think that we have not changed our immigration policy since the 50s. The limits we have on different countries are by just numbers and not by who's coming in or who's not coming in. We do have some programs that allow highly educated folks to come in that have advanced degrees when employers cannot find domestic help to meet their needs. But that's a very small program. I think that, you know, going forward, going back to my demographic slide, when I look at that slide, it tells me that one of the biggest challenges in the next 2 decades to the US economy is going to be labor supply, like it was in the 1800s when we had no immigration policy. It wasn't until we started to do factory manufacturing that labor wasn't as important, and we started to say, whoa, wait a minute, you know. But in the 1800s, we had basically no immigration policy. And you know, something in between that and what we have today is probably what we need. We should be looking, and this is just a strictly selfish perspective on my part, my own opinion. I think we should be looking at programs in immigration policy that are tied in some way to our economic needs.
Thanks for that, John. That one could have been tricky. So
yeah, well, I'm sure I've made some people unhappy with that, but we'll leave it at that.
Well, you know, one more labor question. So so one of the questions is, I'll quote here. So a Wharton professor stated and published a paper that people are not returning to jobs because of bad leadership and managers. What are your thoughts? That's out of my.
You
love your boss, right?
Yeah, that's out of my field. I got a great boss, everybody. I've known Jennifer for I won't say how long, Jennifer.
Sure, long enough.
Great boss, and she's been a great person. But that's out of my bailiwick. That would be somebody in our management department who would answer that. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but to the extent that it is a problem, I don't think it's a big problem. I think that the things that we've mentioned earlier, you know, look, the work lifestyle balance is a big issue. We all have friends who have made some adjustments versus where they were in 2019 in terms of that balance between work and lifestyle. Right. We all have families members that have made those types of changes. I think those are incredibly important. We've also seen really a push forward as a result of COVID, early retirements amongst those baby boomers that are in that 65 range. And again, once you collect Social Security, you can't go back and say, well, let's go back to work. Let's not do it. All right. So yeah, we've had a lot of changes as a result of COVID, one-time changes that have changed our labor force considerably. But I go back to what I said earlier. We have a serious demographic change that's taking place, and it's going to be making it tough for the U.S. economy over the next 2 decades as we see people naturally retire and the group that comes in behind them be a smaller group and have historically lower labor force participation rates.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears here, talk a little bit. We've got a number of questions about real estate in the housing market. So the first one is, real estate prices have increased significantly in recent years. Do you believe that these increases are based on underlying market fundamentals, or are these potentially attributed to a bubble? Do you think they're going to persist?
Yeah, I would suggest that neither one of those are true. I don't think we have a real estate bubble that's been driving prices up. And I'm pretty sure that what's really driving prices up is a lack of new product. I think that's what's really causing a lot of trouble. There are two things in regards to the new product. One is that, buildings and permits, et cetera, have been low the last couple of years for a variety of reasons. And second, building material costs have gone up considerably. I mean, we've got tariffs come on imported lumber from Canada, for one thing, which drives prices up. But in addition to that, you've got worker shortages that have been driving prices up, and just a whole series of things that have generated increased costs associated with building materials across the board. It's just not lumber. It's all you go into a Home Depot and you want to buy a screw, for crying out loud. And a bag of 4 used to cost you $1.15 or something like that. Now they're $3. The list goes on and on and on. And so I think that two things have been going on. One is we've had a limited new supply coming on the market. We've had a lot of money pushed out into the economy in the first half, over the last year and a half. And all of a sudden, and incredibly low interest rates. We started to see mortgage rates rise, but there was a period of time when mortgage rates were well below 3% for 30-year fixed. You put those things together, and that causes an increase in demand for housing. And as a result of that, what we saw was a really big rise. I think in Charlotte, prices have gone up 20% in the last year. In some markets in Charlotte, they've gone up even more than that. And so, that's not, and people ask me both in terms of used cars and houses. Well, are things coming down? No, this is like an old ratchet wrench. Remember, you go one way and then it won't go the other way back. So these are prices that have gone up. They're here to stay for a variety of reasons that I've outlined earlier in terms of what our labor market's going to look like. And so, yeah, I would argue against a bubble in real estate. We don't see people flipping houses. What we see is houses going on the market. And what I just tell you, walking through my neighborhood, not now because there are no houses for sale, but when they do go up for sale in the springtime, you'll see the sign, coming soon. And then before the says for sale sign goes up, you'll see a sign, sold. And that's because the demand for houses far outstrips the supply, simply because we're not building new houses.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Dr. Yang-Chang Chiu, the distinguished professor in our real estate area here and the director of the Children's Klein Center for Real Estate, just did a state of housing report where he showed that in the summer, 60% of homes were selling above list price, which is just unheard of. It's been wild. So I guess then, so what are the implications of that? So one of the questions is, are you we have these home values going up, demand is also going up as people move here. So what are the implications?
Yeah, first of all, just in terms of that 60% number, that's kind of what we're seeing in terms of those signs that go up, coming soon, and they go through a bid up process. Because once you make an offer, say, I'm going to sell a house for $500,000, and somebody offers you that cash, you kind of got to take it.
Sure.
So that's part of the feeling out the market. But back to the question, here's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to start to see interest rates rise. We've already seen mortgage rates rise as a result of some inflation. It's kind of been factoring into that. Right now, you have to pay a significant number of points to get a below 3% 30-year fixed. And as I think rates are going to go up considerably over the rest of this 2022. The Fed is going to have to come out and fight inflation. And as a result of that, we're going to see a decrease in the demand for housing. Now, that's not going to make the prices all of a sudden come back down so that that $500,000 house turns back to 400. I don't think the price is going to change, but I think the upward pressure on prices is going to be eliminated. And so I don't think going forward, we're going to see the 20% increase in housing prices in Charlotte next year that we saw this year. And we may not see much of any increase in housing prices. And what we do see will be probably be the early part of this year when the spring market springs into, as it does every year, and people put their houses on up for sale. I don't think this is going to be repeatable this year, 2022, I should say, going forward. But I don't believe prices are coming down. And I think that the real problem that this creates is going forward, this one-time click up in prices makes entry into the marketplace hard. If you're already in the marketplace, you're fine. But if you haven't entered into the single family home marketplace and home ownership, this raises that hurdle. Interestingly enough, Jennifer, like it did in the 70s, mortgage rates were so high, it was so hard to get into the market for first-time buyers.
Well, John, we are just about out of time. So
we're well out of time.
We've had some great questions. Thank you very much for everything today. To the audience, I'd like to say, please make plans to join us for the next forecast John mentioned in the release of the first quarter report on Wednesday, March 16th. So we will announce the format a little bit closer to the event. And to help us plan for future events, and to determine your readiness really for in-person events and be entered for a chance to win a Belk College gift pack, please complete our brief survey online. You can scan this QR code. This concludes our program today. Happy holidays and see you next year.